Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Seth Monahan, and this is a video I wasn't even gonna make, and somehow I ended up making it twice. More on that later. For now though, get comfy, because today you fine folks are gonna learn a lot more than I originally planned about rising fifth sequences. So if you're a regular around here, you probably remember that I made 3 videos last year about sequences whose chord roots fell by fifth. And we saw again and again that in those sequences, each copy ended up being a step lower than the last one. Well, today all that gets flipped on its head, because now we're going to look at sequences whose chord roots rise by fifth, making copies that are always a step higher than the last one. Now, I need you to know these aren't nearly as common as the rising fifth type, but we've actually already seen one in this series. Way back in video number 6, my introduction to figured bass looked at the opening of J.S. Bach's Flute Sonata in C major. And that was where we learned that if all your chords are in root position, your figured bass won't actually have any figures. Anyway, I'm going to start by playing a recording just to remind you how it sounds, and I'm going to add Roman numerals as we go. So with all due respect to old JS, there's nothing really going on in that second bar. It's just a cadence like a million others. But in the first bar, that's where we find the chord roots rising by fifth. And as predicted, in pairs, these make a sequence that rises by step. And I like this example because it does all the things we'd expect from a rising fifth sequence. First, all the chords are triads. There are no seventh chords here. And in that sense, it's a little bit like the Pachelbel sequence we studied 2 videos back. Second, the sequence starts on tonic, like these normally do. And finally, notice that the sequence stops after just one copy. If we're staying in one key, which we usually do with rising fifths, that's close to the limit. At most, you'd go to 1.5 copies. This is important. Falling fifth sequences can go on forever. We see them go all the way around the circle of fifths all the time. Rising fifth sequences just don't ever do this. It sounds awful. And to drive this point home, we're going to do a little experiment. And it starts, stay with me here, by running Bach's sequence backwards, like literally. Now, if we play Bach's sequence backwards, all of those rising fifths in the bass become falling fifths instead. In other words, we've made it into an actual falling fifth sequence. It happens to start on A minor now, but whatever. My point is that with this kind of sequence, there is nothing to stop us from adding 2 more copies so that it goes all the way around the circle of fifths to end where it started. Sounds great, right? But if we go back to Bach's original, if we run it forwards again, and if we extend that all the way around the circle of fifths, we get something that sounds okay at first, but by the end, it's, well, you can see for yourself. And that's why we stop after 1.5 copies. So let's put things back the way they were. And now we can listen to the actual Flute Sonata one more time, just to appreciate how nice this sequence sounds when we just dip a toe in and move along. So our next 2 examples are also by J.S. Bach. One is from the opening of the so-called Little C Major Prelude, and I like this example because it adds a few things we also see again and again. 3 of them happen in the model itself. One is in the bass. Instead of just leaping up by fifth, Bach divides that leap by visiting the chordal third. And then there are two things in the upper voices we want to notice. One is the red C here. That's a suspension that resolves into a chordal third, super common. And then while that suspension resolves, another voice leaps up by perfect fourth. So here's how the model sounds. And you can hear that the copy does all this, but now has suspensions on both chords. Finally, notice that after the last half copy, Bach segues the rising fifths into a different sequence. Now it's falling thirds, more specifically, the Fonte Romanesca model we studied in video 44. So here's the whole passage from the beginning. Next up is the B minor prelude from Book 1 of the Well-Tempered Clavier, and it gives us a chance to see something that's not super common, which is rising fifth sequences that modulate. And there's actually two of them. The first one starts in D major and uses the same four chords that got the flute sonata off the ground: 1, 5, 2, and 6. But that fourth chord, B minor, acts as a pivot into F sharp minor, where the first system cadences. But then Bach does something cute. He takes that F sharp minor triad and treats it like a first inversion D major triad instead. This lets him launch the second sequence on the same four chords as the first one: D major, A major, E minor, B minor. But now he's going to turn that last one back into tonic. Now, before I play you the whole thing, let's just take a second to notice that the model and the copies here all have the features I pointed out in our last example. We've got suspensions into every chordal third. The A is suspended into E minor, and the E is suspended into B minor. And as each of them resolves, another voice leaps up by fourth. And finally, we've got a bass that fills in the leap of a fifth by passing through the chordal third. Anyway, here's the whole thing. So at the opening, I promised I'd tell you the story about how and why I made this video twice. I'll make it quick. Plan A was just don't make a video. You know, rising fifths are a bit of a novelty in the repertoire we study here. They do turn up now and then, and they always make a big impression when they do, but they're really more of an early 18th century thing. And yet, I had this wild Mozart example that I really wanted to share. So I went ahead and made a short video. That was Plan B. It had the three pieces we just heard and the Mozart. Well, as soon as it went live, I started getting flack. Some people claimed that I was misleading my audience. This was interesting. There are apparently people who love this sequence so much that they simply do not want to hear that it, quote, isn't very common. Well, I said that because it's not in the music I like to talk about. So honestly, I don't care if Corelli used them all the time. Corelli's not my thing. But at the same time, I had some people, often the same people, pointing out that I had left out some really wonderful rising fifth passages in Haydn and Mozart. And that That got me down. Suddenly it felt like Plan B was me cutting corners. Hence Plan C. I went on a bender and I remade the whole video with 3 new excerpts, all of which I really should have included the first time around. So my hope is that it makes for a more balanced view. Oh, and there was this too. Anyway, how about some Haydn? This is the slow movement from his last symphony, and the rising fifth sequence is in the top system. If we look just at the bass line, it seems like it might be just another off-the-shelf model plus 1.5 copies. But we're going to have to figure out what that F sharp is doing there, because that's not going to be in a diatonic sequence. And if we do a bit of snooping, it turns out that this D major triad is actually 5 of G minor. And the chord before, or 6 in the old key, that's our pivot, that's 1 in the new key. So when I play the whole progression, notice how the turn to G minor actually brightens the palette because of that raised F sharp. Now, before we move on, let's talk a bit about melody. The whole sequence is based on this 2-bar motive. But Haydn doesn't place them end to end. He puts one in every bar so that each one overlaps with the one on either side. And it just so happens that this little trick ensures that every single bar has the 4-3 suspension and the leaping fourth that I flagged in the last 2 Bach examples. And here's how it sounds with the bass line. Now, what about that second system? Well, the phrase ends with a garden variety drawn out dominant in G minor. But the 2 bars prior, watch this. Haydn's using a trick that I've never talked about here, but which is going to get its own video not long from now. He leads into that dominant with a string of first inversion triads sliding down by step. 4-6, 3-6, 2-6, 1-6. It's not really functional harmony, it's more gestural than anything, but I think you'll agree that it leads really nicely into the 5. Actually, whether or not you agree, that's what Haydn did, and here is how he scored it. Okay, next up is a truly exquisite passage from Mozart's late G minor symphony. The key signature has 3 flats, but we're actually in D flat major here. And this one, too, starts with a rising fifth sequence, but then settles into a new key just afterward. When I play it, notice the surprise modulation to B flat major. That's major 6, right here. Now, because Mozart's texture is a bit complicated, we're going to analyze the harmony using this reduction. This helps us see that the opening sequence, once again, has the suspension, the 4th leap, and the arpeggiated bass of the Bach prelude. But now there's no extra half copy. It's just one and done. Now, the music that follows really sounds like it's going to be the beginning of a Fonte Romanesca sequence in G-flat major, just like the Little C major prelude. If he had done that, it would sound like this. That's lovely, but that's not what Mozart actually does. That fifth bar turns out to be something of a fake out. We get something like the model of a Fonte Romanesca, but then he aborts the mission 3 chords in, and instead ends on a chord that features E natural. So what's that? Well, it sounds like a dominant seventh, but the interval from G-flat up to E natural tells me that this is an augmented sixth chord. Specifically, it's a German augmented sixth in B-flat major. And once again, that makes the chord just before a pivot. And this is where our surprise modulation happens. So let's go back to the beginning and hear the whole thing, including the cadence that the augmented sixth triggers. And with that in your ears, let's listen again to the original scoring, which turns this already interesting progression into something really magical. So you can probably tell already, Mozart really likes to put a personal stamp on his rising fifth sequences. But sometimes that stamp is pretty eccentric. This is a passage from one of my favorite movements in all of Mozart. It's the finale of the G major quartet, K387. And this is from the beginning of the development. And we're going to pick it apart in stages. And we're going to start by just finding the sequence, since it's not super obvious where it starts on a first hearing. Next, we're going to need to simplify the texture. In this case, I want to build a reduction piece by piece, focusing just on counterpoint. First, because Mozart chops all of his rising fifths in half, the bass is just an endless chain of rising thirds. Then in the upper voices, you have suspensions resolving every 2 bars. And there's 2 types. You have dissonant seconds resolving to sixths, and you have dissonant sevenths resolving to thirds. And every time a suspension resolves, the other voice leaps up by perfect fourth. So despite its distinctively slithery surface, the basic counterpoint here is, once again, right out of the Little C major prelude. That being said, the harmony is not. I'm going to play the entire reduction for you now, and instead of Roman numerals, I'm just going to add chord names. You'll see why in a second. Notice anything strange here? All 6 chords in the sequence are minor triads. And because Mozart sets up the sequence with an E minor triad, that's not on screen here, we have 7 consecutive minor triads, each one a fifth higher than the last one. So I didn't add Roman numerals because you can't. Roman numerals relate chords to the key you're in, and this music just isn't in a key. I know it doesn't sound, atonal, but it basically is for a few gloriously bewildering seconds until it snaps into focus with that half cadence. When we listen again, try to savor that sense of being harmonically untethered, just sort of floating in midair. Okay, it is finally time to check out the Mozart sequence that inspired me to make this video in the first place. And if you can believe it, it's even weirder than this quartet. It's from his unfinished Requiem, and it's unique among today's excerpts in that it has text, and not just any text. It's his setting of the Confutatis Maledictis, which is all about the fires of eternal damnation. Once the cursed have been rebuked, it says, consigned to flames of woe, call thou me with the blessed. And musically, it's kind of demented. There's just no other word for it. But let's set the table here first. You may know the Confutatis from the famous deathbed scene in Amadeus.
Like this. Next measure's rising. Do you have it?
Yes, I think so.
But despite this fire and brimstone opening, the harmony itself is pretty stock. You've got a bass line that walks up the A minor scale, 1 note per bar. And the chords are pretty much exactly what you'd expect. Okay, so far so good, but our interest is in what happens the next time this text comes around. That's where we find our sequence. So I'm going to start with this reduction, which shows a rising fifth sequence with 1.5 copies. And then, just like Bach did in the C major prelude, Mozart pivots into a Fonte Romanesca sequence, except this one changes keys. It takes us from C back to the tonic A. And from there, we get a chromatic lament bass that leads into a half cadence. But of course, this isn't exactly what Mozart wrote. No, Mozart does something to that sequence that suggests to me a kind of vision of hell. Rather than just stay in the key, he makes every triad in the sequence major, but then has every one of them collapse immediately into minor. Now, if you know, anything about this style, you'll know that this is utterly bonkers. It makes no musical sense at all. And this is what I mean about a vision of hell. I'm not saying that Mozart is like depicting hellfire and burning sinners. I'm suggesting that he has made a kind of manifestation of hell in music. A depraved musical hell full of lawless chaos. And the result is that we the listeners, are made in a way to suffer with the damned.
Do you believe in it?
What?
Fire which never dies, burning you forever.
Oh, yes.
Even the choice of sequence matters here. Mozart knows that falling fifths are the norm in this music, and that chains of rising fifths just aren't. Here, they trap us in a kind of musical upside down that's made all the more perverted because we have no sense of key. It's all just really delightfully weird. So here is the actual score, but I'm going to rewind the music a bit so you can hear how this passage sort of kicks the door in when it starts. So basically I made this entire video as an excuse just to play you that passage. I was also planning to tell you that there is literally nothing like it anywhere in music. But I'm glad that I didn't, because while I was making this video, a student randomly told me to check out Schubert's First Piano Trio, written in 1828, right before he died. So I did. I checked it out. And imagine my surprise when this same sequence shows up in the middle of this bouncy, optimistic movement. There isn't a single tormented sinner like anywhere here. All right, and with that, we're done for today, folks. What did we learn? We learned that Schubert's weird, we learned that I can't proofread worth a damn, and we learned that you should never, ever say that something is unique on the internet. Anyway, coming up next are 2 more videos that look at a completely different type of rising step sequence. I'll see you then.